Today we've heard lots of examples of university practices, activities, developments, lots going on in the system. What I want to do in these very few minutes that Norman's offered me is just to open things up a little bit, develop a little bit of a reflective space at the end of the day. Norman gave me the main title. Future of Learning is Lifelong, Lifewide and Open, so it's already pretty large. I've only got about 12 minutes left, you understand. And then I've added another little bit, some challenges for the ecological university, and a little bit more, and even some for Lifewide learning, all in a space of 12 or 13 minutes. Now, my question is this, my agenda is this. We can pat ourselves on the back and say everything's going swimmingly and smoothly. What I want to do is just tweak things a little bit and just say, well, perhaps we could do things on an even bigger scale and be even more ambitious. I want to just ask the question whether we can't widen life-wide learning or life-wide education, and this is how I want to go about it. Some simple starting points, nothing adventurous here at all. Life-wide education, we've heard and we know, it has a concern for individuals, and we've heard a great deal about that, about individual students being able to author their own lives, and we've heard a lot about that, especially this afternoon. This is, to put it in a more fancy language, it's about a continuing project of self-becoming. And we have a sense that education can help this process. And so it follows that since it's a process of continual self-becoming, education should be available through the lifespan and allow connections to be formed across the individual's total learning experiences. So already we've got life-wide education and lifelong education coming into play. And we have a sense that all of this should be open to students, readily available systems, readily available learning. So we've got a huge agenda opening up here, haven't we? Lifelong, life-wide and open. Very ambitious agenda. And there's enough there, you'd have thought, for us to play around with for the rest of our lives. What might a philosophical, if you like, a conceptual analysis of all this, what would it look like? Well, as I say, we can describe this as a philosophy of perpetual becoming. And for those of you who know the contemporary philosophical literature, the big gurus on becoming are Deleuze and Guattari. But anyway, we'll put that to one side. We have a sense that individuals can be self-generating. Not merely being in the world, but go on developing themselves, having a sense of their own formation in the world. It's, again, to put it in more formal language, don't worry, a very quick overview here, a philosophy of educational self-immanence, that we have the resources within us to become ourselves. Personal emergence, we go on developing ourselves through our lifespan. And we've heard the phrases today many times: self-authorship, internal voice, the motivation we were told in the video we were looking at earlier, the motivation comes from within, from inside. That was the phrase being used. This is a philosophy of openness, personal openness, and pedagogical openness, it seems. Individuals now not only can, but now they have the responsibility to self-author themselves. And after all, there's a logic here at work, isn't there? Nobody can do that for individuals, only they can do it for themselves. All straightforward. Well, it may sound then that this is a project concerned with individuals as individuals. It's concerned with their welfare. We care about students as individuals. We want them to really seize the possibilities for forming themselves So their needs coming into play, their possibilities, their own learning. Pause. Is this an agenda for late capitalism, in which everybody looks out for themselves and reconstructs themselves for a fluid world? There's no centre, just a matter of continual reconstruction so that we are more adept, more useful to the world, particularly the economy beyond us. And here I couldn't help, as I was thinking these thoughts through, going back to their wonderful title of one of the books in my library. I'm sure you know the title, at least, Bowling Alone. It reflects solipsistic formations of individuals in Western capitalist society. An educational journey devoid of any sense of universal claims and responsibilities. I'm just throwing out a few hand grenades, you understand, at the end of the day. Sometimes in the literature we see mention of an ecological point of view. What would that look like? Well, the ecological point of view, I take it, brings into play a sense that there actually is a real world out there, and it's not just a matter of the formation of our own life projects. The ecological point of view reminds us that there's a globalized world, very complex world, riven with conflicts, power differentials, and ideologies. And it tells us that whether we like it or not, we're willy-nilly embattled and embedded in those networks, antagonistic as they really are. And if we bring that into play in our educational thinking, then surely a project, a challenge opens up of bringing a greater concern for the world as it is and as it is developing into our learning tasks. So what seems to be evolving here in an ecological point of view is neither a self-centered learning nor even a selfish learning, but a learning that we might call selfless. Not merely immersed in the world, but engaging critically with the world, with a care for its flourishing. So this then, I want to suggest to you, is the issue. To what extent and how might the individual's connections with the world come into play in the eking out of the individual's life education and his or her education for his or her life? The question itself is complex, runs to 3 lines, but the problem is even more complex. For the ecologies that the individual, all of us here in this auditorium as we sit here, are themselves complex and multiple. Knowledge, culture, social institutions, the economy, and of course self. Norman asked me to reflect on what all this might have to do for the university, and so comes into view the very idea, the very possibility of the ecological university. And I take it that the ecological university would take seriously its embeddedness in the world. This is not a university that's purely out for itself, purely on the make, purely concerned with income generation. We see a few of those, don't we? This would be a university that's concerned with the ecologies in which it is embedded and is interested not only in their sustainability, not even in their well-being, but in their flourishing, in their improvement. So this will be a university that's active in the world and is intent on using its resources to help to advance the world. The university as a site of critical, not just critical thinking, but critical action in the world. And here then, I take it, higher education would become an education for critical and constructive action in the world. Students, pick up the phrase of our age, would indeed become, or be on the path to becoming, global citizens, critical, active, and constructive, themselves involved in critical action in the world. And here, of course, their life-wide education would become crucial. Not an add-on, but absolutely crucial to the formation of this kind of student being. It would call for an open curriculum in which they would have disciplines, be embedded in disciplines and professionals, but using that as resources to engage critically with the world. Otherwise, what could this phrase, students as global citizens, mean if we're to do it real justice? The ecological university. So I think, if you don't mind me saying so, there are just one or two little challenges in front of the Lifewide agenda, and in front, indeed, of what it might be to become an ecological university. Very large challenges, I think, open up before us. We need to do really hard conceptual, theoretical, and practical work about taking all of these agendas forward. What is the relationship to be between the university curriculum and the students' life-wide education? When I was working with Norman in Surrey, it was absolutely fascinating because Norman gave me the chance of actually interviewing students, and there are one or two students who were kind enough to be interviewed by me who are in this audience today. I was absolutely bowled over by what some students are doing outside of the university. But I did press them on this issue. How do you see what you're doing out there in relationship to your studies? And one or two, and elsewhere in one or two other universities, would say, well, actually, it was out there in my life-wide education that I really became myself, where I really stretched myself, where I came into real engagement with the wider world. So we have real challenges in front of us to work out this relationship, theoretically and practically. What is that relationship to be? How can we bring this engagement with the wider world into the university curriculum? Doesn't the life-wide education have a role here to play? How are students to be brought up against the messiness, the toughness, the challenge of the real world and confront its messiness? Develop a voice, not just an internal voice, but a voice to engage with the real nitty-gritty of organizational life, the power, dimensions, the ideologies that are located in institutional and organizational life. How are we going to help to develop the human qualities for engaging in this highly complex and challenging world with its power structures and antagonisms? Isn't this the kind of education that's so necessary? And doesn't life-wide education have a massive role to play here to help students to develop an active sense of their relatedness to the world, and so to become an active, critical, but constructive actor in the world? These are hugely challenging possibilities and potentials for us in the world today that we've barely begun to think through. They are formidable questions, I think, to which we've hardly glimpsed the answers. So I'm afraid there's much more work to be done. Thanks very much for listening to me. Thank you.